Well, it's that time of year again where we go over what have been the best films of the year gone by. Let's not faff about with the introduction and get right to it. These are my top 20 films of 2018. Starting us off at number 20, we have Leave No Trace. A great, very understated drama about a father and daughter living out in the woods. Ben Foster and Thomasin McKenzie give fantastic performances that are loaded with subtleties and keep you engaged throughout the whole film. And there's a lot of nice little detail throughout the film, especially in the specific ways the two manage to subsist in such a lifestyle, as well as through Deborah Garrick's very minimal direction. At number 19, we have Spiderman Into the Spiderverse, one of the surprises of the year. Along with Infinity War and the excellent PlayStation game, this has truly been the year of Spider-Man, and this was a great way to cap it off. The directing is fluid and kinetic, walking the fine line between feeling like a comic book come to life, whilst not being so overtly so that it becomes disengaging, and the script contains the usual level of meta flourishes that we have come to expect from Phil Lord. Combine this with a kick-ass and well-used soundtrack, and the fact that we finally got a Spider-Man film not centered on Peter Parker, and you have what may be the best Spider-Man film since Spider-Man 2. Also, greenlight a solo Nick Cage Spider-Man noir film, you coward! Number 18, November. Slightly stretching the definition of what could be considered a 2018 film, this slow-moving drama about the toil of medieval Estonian peasants, come absurdist, Python-esque fantastical comedy, is as delightful as it sounds. The high-contrast black and white cinematography is gorgeous, creating a thick sense of atmosphere and presence, and making the film's more intense moments even more farcical. There are skits in this movie that I'm still quoting, which makes it all the more shame that I only know one other person who has seen it. This is Bella Tarr by way of Terry Gilliam, and if that sounds like your cup of tea, then I would highly recommend this. At number 17, we have Black Klansman. Now this is what I call a summer movie. Despite its at times serious subject matter, the movie tonally feels more like a caper. The script has a lot of wit and energy to it, and the overt to the point of hilarity commentary on contemporary American politics is brilliant and at times cathartic, and I am very much not sad that the movie won Best Adapted Screenplay at this year's Oscars. In addition to this, the film also has a couple of great leading performances from both John David Washington and especially Adam Driver, as well as a fantastic little switch up in its final moments. Ultimately, this movie is a lot of fun, but it also has quite a lot of meaning behind it. At number 16, we have Suspiria. This is how to remake a classic. Taking the skeleton of the original and going off in its own direction, it's beautifully shot, but shot in a different way to Argento's original. The character dynamics, especially between Tilda Swinton's Madame Blanc and Dakota Johnson's Susie Bannion, managed to be engaging in its own right, and the film just has so much atmosphere. Something massively aided by Tommy York's brilliant score, and the 2.5-hour long runtime just flies by. Even if you're a diehard fan of the original, then this is definitely worth checking out, even if it still does not quite reach the heights of its predecessor. Number 15, The Favourite. Gorgeously and oftentimes strangely shot, Yorgos Lanthimos' darkly funny period piece deserves all the buzz it received. The script is toned down from Lanthimos' usual hyper-reality, but it's still no less interesting or clever, with a good couple of lines that I found myself laughing out loud at in the cinema even when no one else was. It's a fantastic satire of bourgeois living in 18th century political culture, as well as some pretty interesting yet not completely serious historical speculatism. And on top of that, it has all-round brilliant performances. Wise, Stone, Holt, Smith, and not least Coleman, who gives perhaps the best performance of the year, are all fantastic. This is the thick of it, set during the War of Spanish Succession, and it's definitely one of the most entertaining films of the year. Number 14, Burning. This is a masterful thriller that constantly keeps you at an arm's length, never letting you be sure what, if anything, is actually going on. Lee Chang-dong's directing is as subtle and engaging as it is unsettling, and the film has some of the best performances of the year in the form of Ah In-yu, Jong Seo-jun, and Stephen Yeun, all of whose characters are fantastically written. I don't really want to say too much about this film because pretty much every detail about it constitutes a spoiler, but this is definitely a film well worth checking out. At number 13, we have First Reformed. Ethan Hawke was robbed of a Best Actor nomination for his performance in this, and his character's arc is absolutely fascinating to watch. Combine this with the fantastic, moody 4x3 cinematography, and you've got what is a massively engrossing film. It manages to be fiercely political, but never loses sight of the character study at the heart of the film, and the film consistently questions the morality and actions of its main character. The film manages to be both gloomy and atmospheric, and cerebral and thought-provoking at the same time, and is a great addition to Paul Schrader's long and esteemed filmography. At number 12, we have Peterloo. Chronicling the events of the infamous massacre at St. Petersfield, in which 15 pre-Chartist protesters were killed and hundreds more injured for demanding one man, one vote, the film captures the fierce political climate occurring at the grassroots at the time. Lee's cinematography is both detailed and visually gorgeous, at times calling to mind old oil paintings, which combined with the excellent costume and set design really suck you into the world. The script manages to be consistently engaging, despite the fact it does tend to rely on large political monologues a bit too much, and helps make the film's 2.5-hour runtime fly by. I'm not sure how big the film was outside of the UK, but if you miss seeing this in the cinema, then this is definitely still worth watching. Number 11. First Man. It seems Damien Chazelle can do no wrong. Capturing the creation of the US space program and the very real dangers and unknowns it put on these Mark I astronauts, the film shows the impact this had on both Neil Armstrong and his fellow astronauts, both at home and at work. Ryan Gosling and Claire Foy are fantastic, but the real star of the film is the spaceflight sequences. They managed to be both intense and claustrophobic, and the fantastic production design really makes you feel just how makeshift some of this technology was, and it was definitely deserving of its best visual effects win as well. While not as good as Chazelle's previous two outings, this is still a great film and definitely worth a watch. Number 10. Free Solo. This is a fascinating documentary that's well deserved of all the praise it's been getting. Chronicling climber Alex Honnold's ropeless climb of Yosemite's El Capitan rock face, the film functions as an extremely fascinating character and relationship study, as well as a great climbing documentary. The cinematography and climbing sequences are breathtaking, but the real emotional center of the film is Alex himself and his relationship with his girlfriend. Understanding the kind of person that would undertake what Alex himself describes as a high-consequence activity, and the very real effect that this has on both him and the people around him. This is a film that had me on the edge of my seat, admiring both its staggering beauty and just how horrific some of the situations can get, and I'm sure it will work for both climbers and non-climbers alike. At number 9, we have Michael Moore's latest offering, Fahrenheit 11/9. Preaching to the converted? Most probably, but it doesn't stop this being a very well-crafted documentary. It's clear Moore doesn't have the budget he once did, but through archival images he still manages to be both hysterically playful and painfully serious when the time arises. For a man whose whole shtick was keeping his sense of humor alive during the Bush era, this is probably his darkest film. And that fact is kind of depressing, yet he still manages to find hope even in the kind of hopeless situation America currently finds itself in. And by the way, we're not doing much better over here either. I also really appreciate the fact that Moore doesn't just spend an hour and a half talking about Trump, and also goes after the Democratic Party and discusses the Flint water crisis. This is my favourite of Moore's films since the original Fahrenheit 9/11, and if you're a fan of his work then you don't really need me to tell you to go watch it anyhow. At number 8 we have Utoya, July 22nd, which is not to be confused with Paul Greengrass's English language Netflix film, also about the tragic terror attacks in Norway that left 77 dead, almost all of whom were children. Possible moral iffiness around making what is undoubtedly a thriller about such a tragedy so soon after it happened, this is a brilliant film. Shot in one take, the film is pretty much intense and horrific from the get-go and doesn't let up for the duration of the film's runtime. And thinking of the coordination required to pull all this off is just mind-blowing. All the young actors did a fantastic job with their performances that can't have been very easy for them to do, and the whole film is as appropriately upsetting and difficult as it should be. The film also never mentions the killer by name or properly shows his face, something that is for obvious reasons not only commendable but pretty much necessary, meaning that the film solely focuses on the experiences of the victims of this heinous act. Ultimately, this is a film you really have to watch only if you're in the mood for, and I did have to pull myself together for a minute after it was over, but I think that should speak to the power and craftsmanship of the film as a whole. Number 7. Isle of Dogs. The animation in this film is just gorgeous. There's so much detail in both the world and the characters that you find yourself getting completely sucked into the film. The script is Anderson's usual brand of awkward quick wit, and it's pulled off with the usual oddly timed precision that one can expect from Wes Anderson and his expertly assembled casts. The story's a lot darker and heavier than many of Anderson's previous films, something that wouldn't really be of note if it wasn't for the fact that he chose to do this through an animated film about talking dogs. There's not much more to say about this film, other than the fact that if you like Wes Anderson's films then you'll definitely like this one, and it is definitely worth watching. Number 6. Matangi Maya MIA. This is still my favourite documentary of the year. Despite being so ignorant of MIA's music that I didn't even know that she was the one who wrote the song Paper Planes, I still found this film to be thoroughly interesting and engaging. Examining 3 parts of the singer's life, that being Matangi, the refugee from Sri Lanka, Maya, the young girl growing up in South London, and M.I.A, the artist, the film presents us with a fascinatingly in-depth character study. Similar to 2010's Senna, which incidentally is also a fantastic documentary, there's just so much footage that alone can tell the film's story, to the extent where at times the movie can almost feel like a narrative film. Matangi seems to have filmed so much of her teens and 20s, and kept the camera rolling even when things were getting heavy. The film doesn't just take her story at face value, however, and it's not afraid to make criticisms of her through the editing when need be. In addition to exploring her identity as a Sri Lankan immigrant, the film spends a lot of time discussing Matangi's politics and activism surrounding Tamil independence. And this isn't just a footnote to the film, as it goes into a fair amount of depth into the Tamil resistance movement and the treatment of the Tamil people back in Sri Lanka. This is a fantastic documentary that I would highly recommend even if you are like me and have absolutely no interest in M.I.A.'s music. Getting into the top 5 now, we have Happy New Year Colin Burstead. This is top tier Ben Wheatley. Centering on a dysfunctional family's doomed New Year's reunion, the film is first and foremost hysterically funny. Every character is just so well written and performed, and watching them interact is just fascinating in a kind of anthropological sense. Everyone is at the top of their game here, and Wheatley appears to have assembled a cast of some of the most underrated British talent out there. From Kill List and Utopia's Neil Maskell, to I. Daniel Blake's Hayley Squires, to Tywin Lannister himself, Charles Dance. Every character is played so perfectly and realistically. Like all the best comedies, it isn't just chock full of wit, but also it's quite depressing and tragic at times, and Wheatley manages to hit the balance between these tones perfectly. As with the case with much British comedy, the microcosm of the family feud works not just perfectly on its own, but also as a way to poke fun of class and political divides in the country, with remarks being made about everything from Brexit to the House of Lords. This is yet another fantastic entry into Ben Wheatley's glowing filmography, and you can watch it on BBC iPlayer right now, so what are you waiting for? Go and watch it. At number 4, we have Cold War. If it wasn't for another film higher up this list, then this would have been a shoo-in for best cinematography. At least in my eyes. The black and white 4x3 camera work is just phenomenal. Consistently perfectly lit and framed with such a clear and noticeable attention to detail. Despite many of the shots being very still, there's just so many fantastic examples that I couldn't even name all of them for fear of being here forever. Going into this film, I was expecting it to look great, but I was also preparing myself for the possibility of being a little bored, what with this being an art house Polish romance film and all. But I very happily found out that I was totally wrong about that. The central relationship, played out over the course of many years and through many countries, is not only fantastic, but the central performances are just so engaging. Thomas Cott was great, but the standout is most definitely Joanna Kulig. Her character is fascinating, and once we get to know her, I became very aware that my worry about this being a boring romance movie was totally misguided. Another surprise about the movie was that the 1950s Poland setting was not just set dressing that would allow the government to come in at some point to contrive conflict in the central relationship, but it was actually really well explored. There's a lot in here about Soviet appropriation of working class, particularly rural working class culture, for political purposes, and the intersection between art, propaganda, and the compromises artists in that situation needed to make. Number 3. Mandy. This film left me speechless after I saw it. It divided both audiences and critics, but I am firmly on the side of the "this film is utterly spectacular" crowd. The atmosphere is just so palpable and oppressive, and combine that with some of the most awe-inspiring neon-drenched direction, cinematography, and lighting, you get a film that just completely hooks you right away and doesn't let up. And the performances are appropriately insane for a film with this kind of out-there presentation, especially from our lead Nicolas Cage, who's able to go full Cage in this, and yet it somehow complements the movie perfectly. And the score as well. It makes me really sad that this is Johan Johansson's final score. It's as delicate and beautiful at times as it is pummeling and over the top at others, and it's a soundtrack that I'm still listening to now. Ultimately, this film might not be for everyone, but if you like slow, palpable, and insane revenge movies that have absolutely no basis in any kind of conventional logic, then this here is the movie for you. Number 2. Roma. This film is just too good. The level of detail in the directing is just outstanding. Every shot, even the throwaway shots, have so much depth to them. The Oscars actually got the Best Directing and Best Cinematography awards right this year, and I can barely even comprehend the words I could use to describe just what level of beauty this film operates on. Every shot is just perfect, and the scale of some of them makes this incredible small and intimate story feel like it's taking place on a massive scale. Indeed, it almost is, as Alfonso Cuarón delves into how both class and the broader political context of 1970s Mexico shaped this woman's relationship with both the people around her and the children that she's employed to care for. And Yalitza Aparicio pulls this performance off perfectly. You really feel for her in her position, seeing her personal dilemmas combined with the genuine affection she has for the family that she works as a nanny for. And when the film starts to pull its punches, it hurts really hard. I am so glad that this film got the attention it deserves, and I would absolutely love Cuarón to make more smaller sized movies like this in the future, and it is my favourite in his entire filmography. I bet you're all wondering what my number 1 film of the year is. Most other years Roma would have easily taken it, but this year I saw a very small film that took its place. A film which, again, I'm slightly stretching the definition of what a 2018 film is, but one that I am very excited to talk about and one that I cannot wait to see again. My favourite film of the year is... It's I Do Not Care If We Go Down in History as Barbarians. This is the first film of director Radu Jude that I've seen, and it certainly will not be my last. The film centres on a theatre director trying to create a play about Romanian complicity in the Holocaust and all the difficulties she faces in doing so. It's not only profoundly meta, as many of the difficulties encountered by our main character were no doubt problems in the creation of this movie, but also leads to a lot of interesting discussions about Romania's actions during the Second World War, the myths around them, and the country's failure to come to terms with them. This movie should honestly be way more of a drag to get through than it is. It's a film that's not afraid to spend 5 minutes of uninterrupted screen time shooting a woman lying in the bath reading the historiography of fascist-era Romania, or the philosophies of Wittgenstein, or whatever. Yet it's still completely engrossing, and the level of depth this film exists on is very impressive. Yet because of the film's wit and energy, it never once feels slow or dry. Oh yeah, did I mention that this film is actually really funny as well? None of the characters are really serious individuals. Even when they're spending hour after hour rehearsing reenactments of crimes against humanity, the humor of the film not only comes from the contrast between these two moods, but also the Kafkaesque levels of roadblocks put in front of our main character, portrayed with such charm and charisma by Iona Jakub, someone whose filmography largely consists of only television roles. She's just fantastic, and her enthusiasm and drive just radiates through the screen. Something that's helped by the fantastic direction that somehow manages to feel very energetic while still being fairly still at times. This is a film in which you'll not only think about what's happening and what you're learning, but also enjoy every second of it. And if I'm making it sound like a really dry, boring historical film, then I'm really failing to convey just how entertaining this movie is. This is one of the best films to have come out across this entire decade, and it has one of the most painfully realistic endings I have seen in quite some time. This is an important yet engrossing work, and it's one that I know will only get a modicum of the attention that it deserves. This was Romania's entry for the most recent Academy Awards, and, shock horror, it turned out this film was just too good for them. Please go and see this movie whenever you get a chance, because I Do Not Care If We Go Down in History as Barbarians is my favourite movie of 2018.